There is no conflict here. There is no struggle. Is it possible to make sense of the meaninglessness of all of this while remaining joyful? It's kind of a dance with madness, isn't it? Yes. And I choose to record this moment where there is some kind of experience happening in this being right now as I realize that there is only one me. There is no conflict. There is no separateness. There's no fight in here. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. And neither is there anything that needs to be fixed in you. There seems to be a world out there that is suffering. There seems to be hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of individual beings who are suffering and struggling to find peace or find war. But it's all meaningless. I watched this great video yesterday. I wish I could remember his name. I'm going to get it wrong. Daniel Schmachtenberger. That's wrong. I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. But he was wonderful. Just this brilliant mind. And he's capable of... he reminded me of Noam Chomsky when I discovered Noam years and years ago. He's just this brilliant man who has encyclopedic knowledge and is able to connect all those dots. And I love the way that he peacefully makes sense. I mean, there's a piece about him, and I'll put his name up. I know I got it wrong. Sorry, Daniel, but yeah, when I see this great manifestation of the rational mind, I see this man making so much sense, rationally, objectively, pulling all this metadata together and just like, oh yeah, and I love it. I loved watching him yesterday. I watched it was like an hour and a half video on Rebel Wisdom, Some people are like that, right? And it's good. It represents this amazing evolution of our consciousness, right? Like the perfection of the rational mind. And I loved how he talked about, social media and all the data gathering that AI is doing in us, and how it likes to, that AI's basically its whole intent is to try to capture as much of our time as it possibly can by feeding you what it knows that you want. You want certainty, you don't want to leave what you already know, because that's threatening. We like conflict, because that keeps our ego minds going. It knows what we want, and it keeps feeding us that so that we'll scroll longer and longer, These are all things that we know these things, right? And some of us have these incredible rational minds, like Daniel, to make sense of all of that. I have not really been gifted with that kind of a mind, and that's okay. There's no comparison to be made, I don't think. Why would we make those comparisons? I think those kind of comparisons fuel the ego. You know, we aspire or we want to be like Daniel. We want to be. I think we want to be important. I think we want to be. We want to feel validated. We want to feel relevant. I think. Yeah. I mean, I see that in myself. I want to somehow be relevant in this world. But who is that wants to be relevant, that needs to be relevant? Is that my truest self? Is that my one self? I don't know. I think the one self is definitely the most relevant. I mean, I'm talking about love, right? A human being becoming love, right? This is what the Christ story is about, is a human being becomes love. And then even in a meaningless death, a death of suffering and humiliation and shame, that being becomes relevant, right? I think this is the story of the Christ, right? This relevant being who gives up his own life. Because there's a realization there that there's nothing actually to give up in this life. Yeah. That's what I do, is I keep coming back to the Christ, even after the story became irrelevant, or the methods or the practices that were introduced to me as a young man around the Christ, those became absolutely irrelevant as I saw through them, as I saw through the meaninglessness of the practice of Christianity as it kind of stands these days. Yet I integrated all of that, and now I find myself as that being. Yes. There's no money to be made in it, really. You can monetize anything, right? But the monetization of the Christ is kind of the Antichrist, I think. I can say that, like laughing now because of the absurdity of all of it, right? I mean, what is money? What is money? I mean, is it the fluid in which we swim? Right? Money is meaningless, right? I mean, it's something we made up. It's part of our the fantasy that we created, right? This false world. It inspires that, if that can be, it fuels that illusion of separate self, doesn't it? Because with money, there's always some that have and some that do not. There's always these comparisons to be made, and we created this experience where we even see money makes people relevant, right? If you have money, you become more relevant to me because I want money and I want to be like you, and you have something that I don't have, right? Yeah. So today I observe all of these. This is how I speak. I observe all of these things that are happening with a smile today. I observe the meaninglessness of it all. I'm no longer trying to make sense out of it, because all the sense making that I ever did already brought me to my conclusion that it's meaningless. And I just took all of the I just lumped all of human experience into this one big category of suffering. And then I just kind of stopped watching the news, because it's just suffering. I see the same thing over and over again. It's suffering, right? And it seems to me that unless we wake up to the one reality, unless we understand that we are not separate, then the suffering will continue no matter how much rational thought we ascend to. I was obviously so inspired by watching Daniel yesterday on Rebel Wisdom. Oh my gosh, yeah, I got joy in it. So it's not that I'm pushing myself away entirely from rational thought. I can see these masters of rational thought rising up, and I can appreciate them, and I can love them. Um, I am fascinated in how that plays a part in the awakening of humanity. I am fascinated by the limitations of logical and rational thought, and I'm fascinated when I can see how humanity can push those limits, kind of like athletes these days. Just like how 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, basketball players looked like this, and now they look like this. Or musicians. I mean, there are these 3, 4, 5-year-old children that can play guitar masterfully in a way that it seems that I could never ascend to that level, and so it's just like this beautiful thing that happens as I seem to be aging, watching these higher states of consciousness arise in all of these fields, right? So yeah, what's it like to see through the meaninglessness of all of it? Even the music that I post on my channel. I mean, I've got these songs, but now there are so many people creating so much. It's like, what is the true value of these songs, right? The age of the rock star is fading, or has faded. We no longer need these individuals to rise up to show us the way. What we're looking for now is the awakening in the masses, right? And I think that's one thing that YouTube, that social media could empower us to do, is to wake up individually, right? And to stop giving ourselves to the teachings of that one special individual that seems to be out there, who seems to have so much more than us that we want, but we start giving ourselves to the teachings of one another, and we begin to really, to come together in small groups where we can actually speak to one another. Do you hear the calling here? Where we can actually speak to the person who is dispelling the darkness in our lives, where we have time for one another. Where we stop looking at those others out there who seem to have so much more than us, and we just tend to the awakening that's happening in each of us. There are some universal experiences around awakening. Generally, the one who awakens, and that is the only one who can awaken, right? There's only one who can awaken. There are not individuals waking up there. It is the one awakening in the individual, right? And so there will always be some kind of personal expression or like different filters, but I mean, there's one awakening that's happening. And generally what happens is the individual kind of crumbles. There has to be kind of a degradation of the self, the false self, right? The 12 steps would call that my life has become unmanageable, right? I'm powerless over blank. And in this instance, the powerlessness will be over self. I'm addicted to self. When we finally realize how addicted to self we are, to the story of the self, right? When we finally realize that we are addicted to the self, and just hopelessly addicted to the self. And I think that's what social media will show us, is how we are addicted to the individual stories, right? So there is this universal kind of experience of awakening to the hopelessness of the self, right? We awaken to the hopelessness of the meaninglessness, or in other words, we see through the illusion of self, and that's kind of what the Christ was showing us, was to see through the illusion of self. How could a being who seemed to be human be willing to give up his own life because there was no sacrifice at all. He understood the meaninglessness of this body experience and the meaninglessness of the self experience. He understood the importance of the salvation of the world. Simply put, right? That there is a salvation. So it was that drive for salvation that animated him in the flesh, right? So that's the universal story of that's part of the universal story of awakening, is seeing through the illusion, seeing through the bullshit, right? And the rational mind can, it can do that, right? We start to see as we begin to try to make sense of the world, we begin to understand the futility of it all. I think once we see that our highest and or deepest rational ascent or descent still has not the power to change a single mind, right? There may be an argument in there. You may want to argue about that, but it's okay. When is an argument changed a mind? I love what Daniel said yesterday. He was saying, he was talking about his own personal development, and I loved it. He recognized that he was unable to identify a single belief that he held that he knew to be untrue. Yet he had the experience of seeing his own beliefs be dissolved before his eyes, and understanding that he had understood that he had once held beliefs that he knew to be untrue. So he knew that was the experience. He understood that this is the human experience, is that we hold beliefs, and then somehow, if we remain open, and his path was this kind of this absolute rational experience where he kind of insisted of himself to stay open. And he was, because basically he was exposing himself to doubt. He was intentionally exposing himself to doubt, which is a legitimate spiritual practice, right? So he does have a spiritual practice, even though and we are all a spiritual practice. That is the individual life. It's a spiritual practice, right? But anyway, he identified that it was his experience that his erroneous beliefs would be shown to him, yet at the same time he still could not identify a single one of his beliefs that he was currently holding that were erroneous. And I love the way he put that. It was so beautiful the way he said that. We don't identify our own beliefs as erroneous until they are identified as erroneous. And we can't identify a single belief that we hold that we know to be untrue. Isn't that perfect? Gosh, he's such, oh gosh, I love his mind. I love the way he did that. Sorry I got your last name wrong, man. What is your name? Let me see if I can find it here. I'll find it. So, yeah, what's going on today? What's going on? Are we waking up together? Or are we fighting each other? Are you? I'm not going to find it right now. Are we finding each other? Are we fighting each other? Are you aware of a conflict within yourself today? Let's take a moment, if you will. If you're still here with me, maybe you're interested. Let's take a moment and let's feel inside of our own bodies for a moment. Can you identify any kind of dissonance? Can you feel into your own being? Are you split? Are you fighting yourself? Were you fighting yourself before you found this video? And have you ever noticed have you ever noticed this shift that happens when there's this conflict in oneself and then there's not? And there's this perfect peace, and there's this state of perfect peace that it seems like, I mean, for myself, I always want to get back there, right? I always want to get back to that state of perfect peace, yet I seem to somehow find myself in conflict. I don't want to be, right? I'm sure there's many explanations for what this conflict is, but we could just simply call it suffering, call it unhappiness. And I think you can agree that no one wants to suffer, right? Everyone wants to be happy. No one wants to be unhappy. So yeah, there is this state of consciousness where one can acknowledge the meaninglessness of it all while remaining joyful. And I think it's because in order for that to happen, we see through the meaningless and into the deeper reality, which I will just call love right now. Some people call it God consciousness, right? So some people call it just presence. And we all are endowed with this presence. And there is not any one particular religion or spiritual practice that is going to give you this presence, and including the practice of absolute rational thought. Now, we may have certain heroes like Daniel who embody that rational thought, and it appears that if I could just think like Daniel, then I would be at peace like Daniel. But I'm not quite sure that that's actually how. He's kind of an anomaly, right? It's an anomaly, and I think just like a physicist, like our world-renowned physicists who they have this mind to kind of explore this particular realm of consciousness. Scientists call it reductionism, right? Where some of us just seem to be particularly gifted to go real deep into one particular area, right? And a lot of times what happens is those particular individuals will kind of tout their experience as the experience. Like the physicist will be able to say, without a doubt, I know that there is nothing besides material. There is no spirit, there is no consciousness. Or there is no, there is no God. Basically, and I have no argue. I would never. I'm not equipped to argue with a physicist, nor do I have desire to try to make a proof of the existence of God. That's just another ridiculous, to me, that's like a ridiculous path to go down, right? Proving the existence of God. I mean, because really, in a sense, yeah, okay, so God is a word, right? And we have this concept. We have a filter through which what are we trying to prove, right? Are we trying to prove the God of the Bible? Are we trying to prove Brahman? Are we trying to what are we trying to prove? There is a subjective experience that seems to be grounded in love. If you have suffered as I have internally, then you may have also spent so much of your energy just trying to be at peace, right? This has become your science, the science of the subjective self, the science of the subjective experience. And that's kind of what like Buddhism is. It's kind of like a science of the subjective experience. So rational thought, yes, yes, it is to be integrated. It is to be understood. But it is a stage of development, right? It's a stage which, when we go transrational, like our friend Ken Wilber, the philosopher, talked about, when we finally transcend that rational state of being by exploring it to our very own fullest potential, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to become Daniel, right? It doesn't mean I don't have to explore it. I don't have to become the expression of another individual mind in order to explore rational experience to its fullest extent in this being, right? It can look many different ways, but once we do that, we transcend the rational, and then we're more open to having an experience of oneness, right? And I'm interested to see, kind of what happens as these very, very rational minds who are obviously already very connected with the one, or they wouldn't be at peace. If they weren't, they would be pointing fingers, right? So our friend Daniel, I mean, he's obviously connected, with the source. He obviously, there's a happiness about him. There's a joy about him, in the sharing of what he shares. So it's not that I'm not sitting here like waiting for Daniel's salvation. That's not what it's about. What I'm looking at is like the bigger picture of these particular manifestations of the rational consciousness and kind of where that's going. I know I'm always kind of here and there. I'm just all I'm trying to do, I think, is just, well, what am I trying to do? I don't even know if today I'm trying to do anything. I guess I'm just documenting this one subjective experience, and then I put it up on YouTube, and a few of you may watch. I hope it has something to do with contributing to the overall awakening. There's no conflict in me today, or at least greatly reduced than it has been in other points in my life. I don't know. What can I say? I'm full of love. I see through the illusion. I see how meaningless all of this is. Yet I'm still filled with love and joy. And I want you to be happy. I'd like to see you wake up. I'd like to wake up with you. If there's anything, I want to wake up with you. I want us to wake up together. Can we wake up together? It's already happened. I'm already waking up with others. I don't want you to think I'm out here all by myself having this awakening experience, because that's not what's happening. I am supported. I am loved. I'm just interested in connecting and understanding you and your awakening process too. I really am. I want you to be happy, and I want to support you somehow, even if it's just by being here, just by making this video. You're not alone. It would be, I think it's wonderful if somehow we connected deeply enough for you to watch like 28.5 minutes of my kind of musings. They would be more than my musings, right? You must be connecting with something in yourself that's waking up. If you stay with me for this long, why don't you leave a comment down there, or contact me by email or Facebook or something. I don't know. I love you. I'm happy for you. I want you to be well. Wow. Here we are. Just take a breath with me. Namaste. The divine in me acknowledges the divine in you. There is only one. And in the one there is no conflict. Nothing's gone off the rails. Everything's okay. God bless you.